This is also fascinating, and yet you never hear about this in Western media. In fact, the way Falun Gong has been portrayed in Western media just seems almost non-existent. Bizarre, I guess that's a better word to say it. So what can you tell us about that?
The journey with the media has been an interesting one. I think there's a couple things to note. And one is, at the beginning, things were actually not that bad. The Wall Street Journal, for example, won a Pulitzer Prize for covering Falun Gong throughout the 2000s. And their journalist there was going through extraordinary lengths. I mean, James Bond type stuff in order to safely meet with Falun Gong practitioners and get their stories and verify their stories.
He was shooting people and sleeping with women?
Well, aside from that part, or at least he didn't tell us he was doing that. But they were the first ones, that series of reports were the first ones to come out and say, actually, you know what, Falun Gong people are being routinely tortured to death in Chinese prisons across China. And he won a Pulitzer Prize for that. The Washington Post came out later in 2001, and they were the first ones to get sort of an official on record saying, oh, actually, torture is part of a three-pronged methodology that we are issuing top down to deal with the Falun Gong problem. So there was some very good reporting early on. Then what happened is the CCP drew a line in the sand, the details of which are a little murky, but after that point, you got near silence until some of the crazy stuff you see more recently. But what exactly was that line in the sand? I think the story of the New York Times is informative on this. So the New York Times, which is a paper, by the way, I hate to talk poorly about. I come from a family where we're 3 generations of New York Times readers. But some of what's happened to the New York Times is very illustrative of what's happened to the media overall. In 2001, the publisher of the New York Times flew to China and met personally with Jiang Zemin. Surprise, surprise. 2 days later, the NewYorkTimes.com is no longer blocked in China. Another day or two later, one or two of the key guys in the New York Times are now embarked on an effort to build a Chinese language New York Times. For years after that meeting, zero coverage on Falun Gong, even as some coverage was happening in some of the other papers. I mean, later that year, the Washington Post came up with that article that I mentioned. So reportage is happening. And all this time, the human rights groups every year in their annual reports are saying Falun Gong's being tortured, they're being put in prison, blah, blah, blah. So the information's there. The New York Times was completely silent. Even as recently as, I think it was 3 years ago, one of their journalists was testifying before the China Tribunal in London about the organ harvesting crimes. And what she reveals is that it's an open secret in China with the doctors about organ harvesting's happening, and she was going to do a whole story on it and expose it, and she was told by her higher-ups at the New York Times, no, stop. So if we know that, and that's happening in the New York Times, well, what's happening to the Washington Post and all these other papers? And you put that side by side with the idea that it's been silent, clearly something's going on. And that's been the real struggle with the Western media for most of the time. There's been the last 2 years has been a different animal, which you can talk about. But that silence has been very difficult for us, and trying to break through that.
Well, I'm curious because the New York Times has done an excellent job covering a lot of the persecution of Uyghurs. So it's not like the New York Times has some policy where we don't say anything bad about China.
Right.
So what's the difference with Falun Gong?
I mean, it really comes back to why is Falun Gong different, right? I mean, I think those are similar questions. And I think the answer is very much the same, is that Falun Gong is, I mean, I think you could say Falun Gong is the single largest whistleblower of the Chinese Communist Party on the international stage. And that's the difference. They're the ones that are not only going to expose what they might be doing in Xinjiang or some region or in Hong Kong, but they're going to expose the fundamental nature of the Chinese Communist Party, the threat that party poses internationally, the true history of all the crimes that they've done. So in the minds of the CCP, Falun Gong is different. And it is on the other side of the red line, and you cannot go there or you'll be kicked out of China. All kinds of bad things could happen to you. So I think there is a difference, and it comes from that.
How do you think organ harvesting fits into this? Because, when you mentioned the New York Times radio silence on the organ harvesting thing, when I read that reporter's testimony at the China Tribunal, I was kind of shocked because it feels like, okay, maybe you think Falun Gong is a little weird or something like that, but to the point where you don't think that it's worth looking into whether people are literally being killed in this very gruesome like state-sanctioned way to like profit off of their deaths. Like that's not like a story that's worth looking into.
Yeah, but what if those people have slightly different beliefs than you? Then it maybe is a little
I mean,
okay
but
to
like
ignore,
you
right?
know, people have different. Uyghurs have different beliefs, right?
That's true.
I think that's an excellent question, and it's important to follow through on what could possibly cause that. What would cause, in this case, a seasoned journalist at the New York Times to be told not to pursue such a story that it clearly is a story? What are the forces at work there? I mean, again, we could guess. We have to look at sort of the data that we have. We have the data of that meeting. We have the data of what happened after that meeting. We have. We also have to look at maybe the flip side of that is access. It's interesting that the New York Times often gets exclusive access to, for example, the CEO of Huawei, or their opinion page covers one of the highest level officials over Hong Kong making the case for the national security law. Weird.
They have some very interesting op-eds.
Yeah, it's very weird. So, you know, I think clearly it's wrong. The question is, why is it wrong? Why would an institution that is supposed to be one of the pillar of American journalism making these highly immoral decisions about what to cover and what not to cover? We know for a fact it's a problem. Exactly what the forces at work and why that's happening, we can only sort of glean from these bits and pieces.
I'm thinking of all the coronavirus coverage that's like, hey, China's got the right idea on how to handle this. Free societies, they're the problem.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're kind of seeing this a little bit now with like the whole Uyghur genocide thing too, where there are now people coming out of the woodwork going, you know, it's not really genocide. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's bad, but it's not genocide.
Yeah. So I was just, especially I think organ harvesting is one of those things where, you know, it's like the genocide idea. Like if you are going to admit that the Chinese regime is committing genocide, or if they're committing organs, yeah, like how can you deal with that country?
What does it then morally compel you to do?
Yeah.
And people don't want to have to be in that position.
Where
Yeah.
it might cost being moral might cost you some money.
Or maybe it's embarrassing to be the New York Times and have kind of dismissed this story.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
like,
you know.
oops.
You know,
It's almost like history is repeating itself.
Eh,
Well, the great thing about all this is like, even if, like, let's go under the assumption that the New York Times was doing some degree of self-censorship. It's not as if that has helped them in China. They just got their bureau essentially shut down. Journalists kicked out. It's not like they're really winning points with the Chinese Communist Party.
And that seems to be a lesson, just from a layman's perspective on this, that seems to be a lesson that Western institutions fail to
Wall
learn
Street
from
businesses.
again and again and again and again, is that they go in, they make compromises, moral compromises, financial compromises, thinking they're going to get something out of it. And the CCP,
It's because they don't realize like they're doing business with people committing genocide and organ
it's
harvesting.
because they don't watch your show. If they were watch your show, none of this would have happened.
You are my
Chris.
favored guest.
Yeah. I mean, well, in a way, it means it's your fault. 'Cause
Oh, you
didn't
are
get
my
your-
least favorite
You didn't
guest.
get your show out enough. If all those people had watched your show, then none of this would have happened.
Well, all right, let's talk about YouTube and Google and support us on Patreon.